recording.
Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Stop shattering in the house. Welcome to Maritime Museum of Tasmania. For any of you who've never been here before, shame on you. This is actually quite, apart from being a very auspicious occasion, it's a bit of an experiment because we've never actually done anything like this in the Maritime Museum this morning. So if you've ever wondered what a test lab wrap felt like, then tonight's your night.
Hopefully there's more.
Well, it's going to setting the bar pretty high, though, having Richard with us tonight. But anyway, so yeah, thank you all for coming along. Thank you for your interest. I appreciate you're not here for the museum. But the museum is open, so if you do want to have a little bit of a wander around, it's going to take a little bit of time to pack back down because this is actually an exhibition space, so we've got to put the exhibition that was in here back in after we finished and things like that. So there is a little bit of time if you do want to wander around the museum. The gallery upstairs is open. Ignore the step ladder because we have to take the projector off the wall to use down here. So that back and all that kind of stuff. So you know, feel free to wander around afterwards. We did unar about the idea of charging for this evening. We decided not to, so instead what we're going to do is we've got a bucket outside for any folding type donations you might like to make in aid of the Windward Bound Trust, because we felt that kind of the Windward Bound Trust, with its ethos of sail training young people and adventure training, pushing people to their boundaries and beyond, and things like that, very much fits with what Richard has been doing and what Richard is going to talk about this evening. So if you do feel inclined, if you have enjoyed this evening and you do feel inclined to support the Windward Bound Trust, then please feel free to make use of the bucket.
Can you post any electronic?
We can work on that.
Also, I'm told the gift shop will be open.
Yeah, the gift shop is open. I'm running that as well. You actually have 3/4 of the staff of the Maritime Museum. It's screens. So the gift shop is open. So you know, catch me if you see something exciting in there that you want to buy. And the only other thing is we do have copies of our quarterly Maritime Times magazine. Here, you're free to take a copy of that away with you, and they have membership forms in there if you want to feel that you might like to support the museum in its efforts. That's about it. Housekeeping, there are 2 toilets out in the front doorway, one on the right of the front door, one under the stairs to the left of the front door. They're the only toilets in the house, so you may need to queue. Other than that, I don't think Richard, actually from what I've heard, listening into conversations, I don't think Richard needs any kind of introduction either for who he is or what he has done. So I think I'll just pass straight over to Richard and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mark. Lovely to have you all here tonight. I have just had the opportunity to have a look upstairs, and wow, it's worth having a look. So do head up. I've not seen that before, but it's just packed with exciting things. So, it was a world record of sorts, in a little way. So solo, non-stop, unsupported, from Australia to New Zealand by sea kayak or ocean kayak. That's my claim. What I thought I'd share with you tonight is a bit of what went into that adventure. And so some of those things, that's what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. And I went down to the Antarctic some years ago and I experienced a storm like that on the way down. And I had that in the back of my mind. That's what it could be like out on the Tasman getting to New Zealand. How do you face a dilemma like that and stay alive to get to New Zealand? There was also the possibility it might be like that. That's the dream, to have it like that and enjoy the experience. This is my companion. I had hoped to have it out the front tonight, but biosecurity has held it up in Bell Bay, so it's still waiting to make its appearance down here. Hopefully at some stage it will be on display in the museum. Blue Moon, 10 metres long, 850 millimetres wide, Compare that to a normal sea kayak, which is about 7 metres long, something like that, 6 or 7 metres, and about 600 millimetres wide. Plus, Blue Moon weighs about 900 kilograms, just under a tonne when it was fully loaded. So slightly heavier than a normal sea kayak. I'm sure you all want to know, why do it? And some of you in the room would get it already. But part of the message from all of this is, whatever your adventure is, whatever your dream is, make sure you chase it. It's well worth doing. So why do it for me? And so it comes back to, I have had probably 40 years of canoeing. I love canoeing in all its forms. And so this was a progression of that. Some of the canoeing that I've done, whitewater, some exciting stuff all over the world now, chasing whitewater. The thrill, the adrenaline of that is pretty exciting. This was in Chile, some of the biggest whitewater I've ever done. Pretty exciting stuff. It's probably, this sort of thing, way more risky than just paddling out on the ocean. I've also been down to Antarctica. I showed you that picture of the storm, and this was actually paddling down in Antarctic. Something I recommend to all of you. It's an exciting thing to do. That's sort of just a general view of my canoeing, but it embeds a desire to do long distance canoeing too. And so Hawkesbury Canoe Classic, a fairly traditional race up in Sydney, is where I started my desire to do longer distance. 111 kilometres overnight, and I've done quite a few of these now, that started back in 1981. Murray Marathon, that stepped up the distance to 400 kilometres, just took a chunk of the Murray, and it's a race that happens each year on the Murray. The exciting thing, stepping up to 400 kilometres distance. Step up again, the longest canoe race in the world currently, the Yukon, and we have some people here that have also done this. Steve Dawson, where are you?
Just about. Just up there.
Yes. 1,000, not kilometres, but miles, so 1,600 kilometres through some amazing wild places in Alaska and Canada. That's what it looked like. Had to be done with another person. Just point out in this little picture here, there's that red button just behind my partner. If you press that button, it said, "It's easy." Yelled at that. So we remember that race, it's easy. I've also had quite a bit of paddling down here in Tasmania, so I thought I'd just share a little bit of that. Some of you will know these places. And some of you will actually have been involved in XPD, a 10-day adventure race. You can see that course that we did across Tasmania. It included some great canoeing along the way, those blue tracks. Also some climbing, some iconic places. This is on Overland Track, just near Mount Ossa. Had some exciting times along the way. Also, done the crossing of Bass Strait quite a few times now. West side via King Island, east side via Flinders Island. The desire to be out in that sort of conditions, to see what it's like to be a bit rougher, to be out sea kayaking. It's exciting stuff. It gets me feeling like life's worth living. It has some beautiful scenery along the way. Stunning. Those granite boulders, life out there is good. One of the highlights in that strait is this little tiny rock, just a little bit west of Flinders Island. It's a seal colony, so those little dots are hundreds of seals on this big rock in the middle of nowhere in Bass Strait. It's those sort of things that make sea kayaking exciting. It's another typical scene. This is on the south tip of Flinders Island, the sort of things that get me excited and make me want to do more sea kayaking. I also spent my long service leave paddling around Tasmania. So I've seen a little bit of Tasmania in that trip, 53 days going around. Started at Devonport when the ferry dropped us there, went out in clockwise around. Back in 2007, some of the sorts of things we saw along the way. Beautiful parts of Tasmania. Wonder who in the audience has been there. Recommend it again.
What time?
Or there.
What time of the year was that?
This was summertime. This has been to Matsika Island. Oh, beautiful. This is just the most amazing place. I actually called the canoe that I went down there, Matsika, to make sure that I'd get there on the trip around Tasmania. As part of that, I came up to Hobart, so all of you know that scene. That was the scene as we paddled up and we were about 3/4 of the way around the course. And some of you might even know the person, Matt Wootton, policeman from here. We met up with him when we were here. He's in the audience, is he?
Hello.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for being a part of that journey. This is how we saw the Iron Pot on that trip. Beautiful, calm day. There were actually dolphins all around us as we paddled around Iron Pot on that day. I can contrast that with another scene when I headed out my Blue Moon, which didn't quite look like that. What I wanted to share with you next is some of the people that I looked up to as adventurers that sort of set the standard for adventuring. Sort of got my background of canoeing. Now these people started to fill in the why do bigger adventures. One of those people was Michelle Lee, a friend who first rowed across the Atlantic and has just finished, as this picture shows, rowing across the Pacific. 240 days alone out on the Pacific. Pretty impressive. What's happened there? How do we solve that one? I go to Mark and ask for technical advice. You're getting a sneak preview of everything here. While he's doing that, I'll just show you an artefact that I brought along with me here. So this is just one of the pieces of equipment that we'll get to a bit later. This is the paddle that I used for the trip. You can pass it around and try it out. Try not to knock out your partners while you're using it.
Is that an exercise thing?
It is. I'll pass it. There you go. So it's beautifully light. It's a masterpiece of paddle making. Try it out. 4 million paddle strokes, I think that paddle's gone. So it's got a bit of use. Well, I think it probably should be, and so when Blue Moon arrives here, the paddle will go with us.
Paddles big we can fit in.
Maybe that's the way, yes. Thank you, Mark, for sorting out that technical glitch. All right, another person that certainly inspired me. Another person in the room tonight. You could just stand up there, Luke.
I can embarrass me, mate.
So Luke has done some amazing things, like climbing some of the highest peaks on the highest of each of the continents. He's paddled down the length of the Murray. He's rowed across the Atlantic. Those sort of people, the chance to talk to those sort of people is pretty amazing and very exciting. So thank you, Luke, for inspiring us. Sian Gresser, lady from Sydney. She's one of only 3 people who's ever paddled direct across Bass Strait. So an inspiring person to be able to put together that sort of journey and carry it off. More directly involved in a Tasman trip, Colin Quincy was the first person to ever human-powered between Australia and New Zealand. So he rowed from the north tip of New Zealand back to roughly Brisbane. This is back in 1975. Back when there was no tracking devices, no one knew where he was when he was doing it. It was like a miracle when he turned up in Australia, having achieved that first. So the first people to try kayaking between Australia and New Zealand, Andrew Macaulay was the first to try it. He got, as the picture shows, almost to New Zealand, and then no one quite knows what happened to him. His boat, pretty much a standard Mirage Sea kayak. And so some pretty tough conditions that he had to endure using a boat like that. There was no space to sleep on it. All he could do was slide down inside his cabin and use that little yellow device in the bottom right picture to try and keep water out, not very successfully. So he slept in a puddle in the bottom of his canoe, straight-jacketed into the limited space. A lot of stuff on deck, but a very tough way of trying to do it. James and Justin were the first to actually achieve it. You can see their course there, a few loops and things along the way, so it's not a straight route. It takes a few extra kilometres to get across when currents and wind take over along the way. But they did do it first. And that was their boat, significantly bigger boat, with space at the back and a cabin to be able to sleep in relative comfort. The first solo person, Scott Donaldson. He was first solo, but he did stop off at Lord Howe Island and he did get some food dropped to him along the way. He had 3 tries at trying to get across the Tasman. The first try was very short. The second try was 95 days worth. He got to within about 150 kilometres of New Zealand, decided it was all too tough, got rescued. Just he got rescued, his boat didn't, but some months later, his boat arrived in New Zealand on its own. That's pretty clever, isn't it? So just as a summary of the courses that each of those people took, there's Andrews on the bottom, heading out from close by, Fortescue Bay, and then the pair and Scott further up New South Wales coast and ending up on the north of New Zealand. So that's the background to Tasman kayak crossing. I just threw in this guy. This is a more recent achievement. Cyril set out from Golden Gate Bridge, like the picture shows, and kayaked his way 4,500 kilometres to Hawaii. It's probably one of the most amazing kayak trips that's been achieved so far. Put in context, my trip was only about 2,000 kilometres. Relative walk in the park. Well, next to share with you a little bit about the kayak design and construction and the choices I made on what my kayak would be like. And so this is a few early drawings and the upper drawings of what the canoe might be like. And then the lowest drawing is what it actually was pretty close to being like. It's split up into a number of compartments. The compartments at the ends were for storage, and then 3 main central compartments. The cockpit for doing the hard work, bedroom at the other end for sleeping in, and then an intermediate room, the room that I call vestibule, where I could change out of wet cockpit gear to dry sleeping gear, and do the cooking in that vestibule area as well. So a semi-wet, semi-dirty area separating the 2 important other areas of the canoe. That put together meant that the boat was about 10 metres long. And this was building the boat. This is in my family's garage. We extended the garage so it would fit the boat. And my family went through the whole trials and traumas of fiberglass and dust and smell as I plodded away at building this boat. It's a foam cord fiberglass boat, mostly just normal fiberglass. There's a little bit of Kevlar in there, but just fairly standard fiberglass design. It's an interesting boat. So that's showing the compartments during construction. Again, 2 compartments at the front for storage, 2 compartments at the back for storage. Cockpit, the next section at the front. Vestibule in front of the bulkhead that has the hatch in it, going through into the bedroom at the back of the boat. That was the layout. Lots of bulkheads, Titanic proof. And one of the most endearing characteristics that I managed to build into this boat, almost by fluke, I chose a width for the boat that made Blue Moon amazingly stable and secure and able to do things like standing up in it and being self-righting, so that it was a safe haven pretty much no matter what sort of weather conditions I got out there. I made the boat. That was about 3 years ago, and from that point I went through a whole series of trial paddles, and in those trials I found out a few of the things that needed sorting out. So this next bit is about that series of things. Most of the paddles were just off Sydney Harbour and off Apple Tree Bay up north of Sydney, if any of you know there, Line Island, and this was an early trial. I actually did something like 12, 13 different trial paddles, got up to about 1,000 kilometres of trial paddles, working out what worked, what didn't work, the good things, the not so good things. One of the not so good things was the rudder. The rudder throughout has been a little bit of a trial. I started with a rudder that was too small and too fragile, made it bigger, still had problems along the way, trying to sort out making it robust enough. This is the little wheel that controls the steering of the rudder, and that was problematic throughout. The wire that I used to get up to foot pegs at the front so that I could steer with my feet, that broke on an early trial, so I replaced that with Spectra instead of the wire. That helped. I also had a square drive in that wheel that went on top of the rudder post. Worked out that the plastic of the wheel was too soft and would just round out the square, so I ended up not being able to steer the rudder. Those sorts of things I slowly worked out along the way, and it did take one rescue and a tow back in from a trial when a rudder failure happened in one of the trials. One of the other problems that I faced was that I get seasick. Seasick on just about every one of those 12 trial paddles. It's not a nice feeling at all. What I found out though, and Luke probably could tell you, is that there's a rowing race across the Atlantic. Lots of people go in that rowing race. Almost all of them get seasick to begin with, but then almost all of them get better and don't get seasick for the rest of the time. So for some reason we acclimatise. Thank goodness I acclimatise. So I do get seasick for the first bit and then it's gone. And so for my trip across the Tasman, I got seasick, got over it, and that was that. Thank goodness. I did find in the trials that steering Blue Moon was tricky. It's got a lot of cabin, a lot of windage. Whenever the wind was blowing the wrong way, it used to blow Blue Moon off course. So this was an early trial. This is actually on a Bass Strait crossing. We made a little fin to stick underneath Blue Moon to try and steer better. And that developed into creating a centreboard quite a way down the track, and the centreboard radically improved the steering ability. Also had troubles with the electrics on board, And so this is a scene of a friend up at Port Stephens trying to get to the batteries that were at the hardest point in the back of the boat. He was quite a big person. He's fiddling around up there doing stuff to the batteries, trying to sort out the electrics that went with the solar panels. He did a great job though, and after that, the batteries and the whole electrical system worked without fault the whole way. So I had two trials at getting across the Tasman to New Zealand. The first one was a year and a half ago, Christmas a year and a half ago. This was optimism, because at that stage New Zealand was shut because of COVID. If I'd landed in New Zealand, they may well have said, back you go. Not sure if they could have done that, but they might have done that. So we came up with this idea that I'd just do a paddle out and a paddle back again, and that would be kind of equivalent to paddling across the Tasman, maybe. So I did set out. This was a few family and friends when I set out from Roseville in Sydney. Came up with this idea that rather than just heading straight out into the ocean, probably it was a wise risk management thing to just head up the coast first and then head out towards Lord Howe Island and do that as a much safer way. If something went wrong, I could crawl in and sort things out. So heading up to Newcastle along the way. Coast hopping has its dangers though, and that was nearly the end of Blue Moon when I almost crashed into rocks at Seal Rocks. Not a good idea in a way, although it did have the advantage if I had crashed there, I could have just stepped onto land. So I got to Port Macquarie, and that became the point that I stepped off and headed out into the ocean. That was, at that point, I'd never really spent more than 2 or 3 days out on the ocean. So it was a pretty exciting moment. It was certainly hitting goals of getting out there, seeing what it was like to be alone, to be out in the ocean with no control over the weather, just seeing whether I could cope, whether Blue Moon could cope with that sort of thing. So pretty exciting at this stage. And I got to share this Tasman One trip with a lot of sea life. A lot of dolphins came around. There was a lot of other animal life all the time. And it included a lot of shearwaters, thousands of shearwaters, and I'd share the night with these things roosting on Blue Moon. I loved it. Who knows why? Wild animals, but they'd all be there. And they were very friendly. I could hold the paddle up and they'd land on the paddle. It was that sort of friendship. That was what Tasman One turned out to be. Just at the right-hand end of that photo is Lord Howe Island. So I didn't even quite make it to Lord Howe. As I was getting close to Lord Howe Island, there was a big cyclone happening just to the east of it. And so my land support said, "You're best not to be near a cyclone, turn back now," which I did. And then I spent quite a bit of time, as you can see in that trace, just being wandered around by the current, heading who knows where. Unfortunately, my land support at the end of that trace decided I was at too much risk out there, that I might blow off towards New Zealand again, run out of food now that I've been out for that amount of time. So they sent out a boat to come and tow me back in. That was back into Port Stephens, and then I paddled back down into Sydney Harbour. But when I got back to Sydney, I felt like it was unfinished business. I hadn't got as far as I wanted to get. I hadn't achieved what I really wanted to achieve. So there had to be a second try. I'd used up Christmas a year and a half ago. Summertime was a good time to go. So it was going to be a break of about 9 months while I waited for the next summer to come along. And so there was time to do some equipment fix-ups, some improvements. And so I did do that. But I thought I'd share with you just some of the equipment ideas and thoughts that went into the overall project. There's the sea anchor. No chance of anchoring to the bottom, but a sea anchor helps slow down drift. And my progress through the water was something like 35 kilometres a day. Blue Moon doesn't go very fast, maybe only 3 kilometres an hour. You can actually swim faster than that. So slow progress, 35 kilometres a day. If I was being blown backwards at night time, this sea anchor helped reduce that drift so that I didn't have to make up too much the next day. I had to get air into the cabin, but I didn't want water to come in with the air. And so I had 2 ventilators like this that let air into the vestibule and then filtered air into the cabin so I could have air without having water. And this sort of ventilator, if the boat was upside down, minimised water getting in, so that I did only get air in and not water in. I had a satellite receiver. The receiver actually sat inside the boat with just a fairly waterproof aerial outside the boat. That meant that the receiver, electronic gear, was away from salt water. It also meant, because it provided a Wi-Fi within the canoe, that my iPhone and my iPad were well and truly away from salt water. One of the problems Andrew McCauley faced was that he started with 3 mobile phones. All 3 of them had succumbed to salt water before he disappeared. I didn't want that problem. So using my iPhone and iPad only in the bedroom where they were safely out of salt water was one of the risk minimisation things. So using the satellite phone, on Tasman 1 I did talk to people each night. Tasman 2 I decided that was too intrusive on the overall experience, so I didn't use the voice capability. I just sent emails out. If you were following on Facebook, it was a story that I sent out each night to a wonderful person in Renford who then spread it to the world. And he'd send back little snippets of the world communicating with that Facebook to me. I had solar panels, 6 solar panels on the boat to provide power. Also carried 2 big car-sized batteries to store that power. That was to power up the electronic gear that I had. Also for a white light on top of the boat, cabin lights inside, and also a big pump if I needed to pump water out of the boat. Worked really well. I had the ability to cook, to heat up water so I could have hot food. So this little jet boil with a gimbal support was my lifeblood to hot food. Worked really well too. One of those little gas cylinders lasted about 20% of the trip, so I only needed about 5 gas cylinders. It's such an efficient system. I had a whole range of emergency type things. So I had an EPIRB that went with the canoe. There was also the chance, like with Andrew McCauley, that the EPIRB would locate the canoe but not the person. So I also had a personal locator beacon that I wore in my life jacket all the time. And so I had a way of letting the world know if there was trouble where the canoe was or where I was. I also had trackers. For those following on Facebook, Spot Tracker was the thing that sent out a location of where Blue Moon and I were every 10 minutes, most of the time. I had a second tracker that I used to communicate with my land support. I just pressed that once a day. As long as they got that ping once a day, they knew that I was safe as well as Blue Moon being safe. It's one of those risk minimisation things. I also had that device on the right, a Garmin, that had a limited capability of providing messages to and fro. So if the whole satellite system had given up working, I still had that Garmin that would have had some ability to get messages out. As a last resort, I also carried a little tiny life raft, 2-man life raft. So if everything had gone to custard, that was my last way of getting myself out of trouble. Water and water supply, fresh water supply had to be solved, and this was the device that I used to solve it. A little desalinator. It started life as a hand pump version, and a good friend converted it to this foot-operated version, so that my arms, which were doing all the paddling work, got a break, and my legs could get some exercise in pumping the desalinator. I was using something like 1.5 litres of water a day, and it took about an hour a litre to use the pump to get fresh water. So every second day I was using the desalinator for about 3 hours to get my water supply.
Did you get rainwater through the gutter system?
So, David's just mentioned that I had a gutter system that I built around the boat so that I could collect water. It had worked well on Tasman 1, and I've had a few big storms on Tasman 1 where I got many litres in seconds. On Tasman, the main Tasman crossing, I got next to no rain. 67 days going across, and there was only about 3 days of lightish rain, so I never really got the chance to use it. It was one of those backups, though, that I built into the boat in case the desalinator stopped working. There would be a chance of getting water somehow. As it turned out, I didn't need to use it. I got weather reports in every day through the satellite system. Roger Batten was the man. He was just sensational. Some of you might know him through all his work on sailing. He is fantastic. He knows his stuff. And so he'd tell me when storms were coming, what the wind was going to be like, give me confidence that I was going to get a great day ahead, or maybe warn me that I need to be more cautious that a rough time is coming. So it comes to the real deal, the trip across the Tasman. And the next little bit will just give you an idea of what that was like. So I'll start with where I started from, right here almost. The plan had been to start at Sandy Bay, to go out and round and down, out through Port Arthur, because I had friends who lived there. It seemed like a great way to get out. What actually happened was that it was a pretty awful few days, a lot of southerly winds when I set out, and so I took that little route up and through Dunalley Canal instead. It was a bit more protected up there. It was a nice way to get out. At the other end, I had this romantic idea that it'd be nice to arrive at Milford Sound. What better place than that tourist attraction? To cruise in there and land in a beautiful place. I had as a backup that I might end up further up the South Island. You can see in that drawing, that little red dotted line at the bottom of New Zealand, that's what actually happened. Way off course. So this just gives you a little bit of a summary of those two trips. The trial trip out to Lord Howe Island and the actual trip and how it diverged southward to the south of New Zealand. I think I can claim that I'm probably the person that's kayaked further south of New Zealand than anyone ever. Because no one else in their right mind would go down there. How to get the boat to the start? That was my dad's job. He was the chauffeur to get the boat onto Spirit and get it across here. I had to get a lot of stuff down here too. And so Steve and Kate Dawson, Steve here, were the recipients of, was it 20 boxes of junk?
Here 15, Richard.
15 boxes of stuff. A whole heap of stuff that had to get down here. He got it and got it to me in Hobart. To the first day, David here would remember being part of that moment, and a few others maybe in the audience can remember the moment outside Sandy Bay Scout Hall. This is D-Day, about to set out, about to launch. We found a launching ramp just around the corner in Sandy Bay, in the main sailing area there. back the canoe into the water. Tasmanian Sea Kayak Club are there to escort me away. There I am, taking the first strokes to leave Australia, leave Sydney. And there was Dave with his team to paddle with me out of Hobart. Pretty exciting moment. Just round the corner in Storm Bay, Storm Bay was living up to its Storm Bay image. It was pretty rough, it was southerly, it was tough going, and slowly the Tasmanian Sea Kayak people peeled off and I was left slogging my way.
The truth is we chickened out. We went on.
I didn't get very far that day. It took all day to go 10 kilometres down to Blackman Bay. The second morning I woke up and I was greeted by Mark, this person that does outdoor education at Hutchins School. He'd arrived with a coffee and an egg and bacon roll. Which was an exciting moment. So the Iron Pot, and this was my view of the Iron Pot when I got to it. Heading out from Blackman's Bay, it was a pretty grim old day. It was very windy still. I was lucky to just be able to sneak around the Iron Pot and then head up towards Dunalley. This friend from Sydney came out the next morning that I parked at for more, Andrew. He said, I've got something for you. And it was a huge chunk of King Island cheese, plus a couple of apples. We thought they were the best things to keep you going. It's very exciting. And so through Dunalley Canal, and stopped the next night there. And this was the final farewell with my family and some close friends at Dunalley. And then paddling out from there. Some of you will know Boonah Island Castle. That was the last landmark, really. And Phil is in the audience. He was paddling with me, the last person to paddle alongside. And then this is my sister farewelling, the last farewell moment as we left. You can see it was still a pretty grim day, and so a bit of grey atmosphere. But what was it like out there? I've left now, out in the ocean. What was it like? So this is a typical scene out on the Tasman. A little bit of lumpiness in the sea, sort of bluish sky with some clouds, just plodding along. That is my everyday view. 70% of the time was pretty much like that. It did get a little bit rougher, or as someone said, a little bit sportier at times. Was a bit rougher. A few moments when the bow was under, the stern was under, I was under, crashing through some waves. It was quite exciting. What I needed was a drone to get an overall picture of what it was actually like. A bit more waves going by. That sort of thing didn't happen that much though. Maybe 5% of the time when it was that sort of roughness. And I probably didn't get the camera out when it was truly rough. Mark. You'll just have to live with that view of what it's like out there occasionally. That gets me sort of excited. That's the adrenaline, the white water side of paddling. See, you sort it out. In all ways, it also became incredibly calm. And that sort of thing really makes it worthwhile being out there. When it's that calm, it's just beautiful to be out there. There's such peacefulness, there's no responsibility. It's just so nice. And that's what would make it recommendable to be out there. Pretty like that. It's just a real treat. People have asked me what was it like to be alone. And I say to them, well, it didn't feel like being alone. And I think there's two things in that. I wasn't alone because I was there with Blue Moon, and Blue Moon was the mate in all of this. I wasn't alone because there was wildlife, animal life, sea life. So just to give you a little bit of a snippet of what the sea life was like, this was a seal. There were a lot of seals, dolphins and things when I did Tasman 1. There was only 3 seals that popped up on Tasman 2, the main trip. So a lot less wildlife down south. Some of you, if you were following on Facebook, would have seen the cartoons that were drawn along the way by a friend. This was quite a clever one. I've written in my story to Facebook, but I wondered how far seals roam from shore. And so should I be seeing them out in the middle of the Tasman or not? He turned it around to how far the humans travel. Not far, usually, is the answer, of course. I did have some sharks along the way. And so this was a very friendly shark. He stayed with me for about a week. Had 2 mates, and so the 3 of them were there for about a week. They'd pop up each day, have a swim around the boat, eye me off. And so it's definitely a shark, I could tell that. Looked like it, all the right ingredients. But I could never tempt them to eat anything. I tried giving them some of the food that I had, some tuna and some salmon and things. No interest. I tried dangling my hand in front of them. Still wasn't interested. Just so friendly. I also had this amazing moment. Probably the highlight of the trip was these 2 sharks, 2 whales that came along and swam alongside Blue Moon. Swam up this side, swam in front of the boat, turned around, swam back across the other way. Probably about the same size as Blue Moon, just interested in being there, clearly interested in saying hello to me, and I was certainly excited to see them. And that was the display that they put on for me, right there, right in front of me. Just a bit closer up. That's what those 2 whales looked like. It was certainly an exciting moment. Apparently they're beaked whales, so look quite like a porpoise, but much, much bigger, about 10 metres long. So that was exciting. Didn't have a lot of bird life on Tasman 2, but there was some. And one of the treats was this little bird that used to come along. I call them skippers because they skipped across the water. They'd fly in, flat, 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 and then they'd sort of land on their feet and go bounce, bounce, bounce without flapping their wings, and then they'd be off again. I never worked out quite why they were doing it. That display happened lots around me. Always fascinating why they were doing it, what they were doing it for. Never saw them eat anything, it was to do with fish. So it was always fascination to see these little birds. Also the big birds, the albatross. And I would see maybe 10 albatross a day, something like that. They'd come in, they'd soar around. Usually they just soar by in their incredibly efficient way. Then they'd also come in and land and really get up close and personal, as you can see. It's great to have the interaction with them. So other facets of being out on the ocean, what went right, what went wrong, what's it like to live for 67 days out on the ocean. So this is a typical scene of me out paddling. What I hadn't realised from my first trip, from Tasman 1, it was hot, it was warm, it was great to get in the water and swim. Tasman 2, leaving from Hobart, it was cold. Every day out paddling was cold. I hadn't taken enough clothes for that. I had 2 of these waterproof jackets. I wore both of them most days. I had my life jacket on, had the PLB on board that. I had a spray egg that kept water out of the cockpit.
That was the typical need each day. I had thought it'd be more like this, a problem for getting sunburned. So having a hat that covered my face, having long sleeves. Long sleeves were much more useful for staying warm than they were for keeping sun off. What was it like inside the vestibule? That's a typical scene in there. You can see there's a whole lot of stuff, including the wet clothes that I wore each day. So this photo's there really to just lead into, I had 2 sets of clothes. You can see a replica that I'm wearing. This was what I wore every night. The real set is still with the boat, so I couldn't actually wear that tonight. But there was also the set that's hanging in that photo. That was the set that I wore every day. Same set, same wet, soggy stuff that I put on every morning. But it was a chore to have to put on wet clothes every morning when I knew I was going to go out in the cold. That's another view of the vestibule and how it looked in the evening when I was in the bedroom. So all the bits and pieces stacked in there and tied down so they couldn't move around. Then that's looking the other way in my bedroom, and the space that was always cosy, always a reassuring haven out of the wet weather. Dry always. You can see down the right-hand side I had all of my dry food, like Weet-Bix and Vita-Weeks. Those 2 Pelican boxes in the middle with my electronic gear to make sure that didn't get wet. And then there are a few dry bags on the other side that had sleeping bag, spare clothes, those sorts of things. Plus a mat for luxury sleeping at night time. One of the dilemmas that I faced was that I got lots of barnacles. And after about 30 days, I had hundreds of barnacles all about this long. So I had to get out of the boat and scrape them off. I'd come armed with the scraper, and so the barnacles took 20 minutes to scrape away. I had to do that twice, so 30 days, 60 days. It was a chore, more because it was so cold in the water than it was actually doing the scraping. They came off pretty easily, so it was just facing the cold water that was a dilemma. Not too much went wrong physically, but I did have a crack in my heel, and that crack just seemed to get worse and worse. And it was quite painful at night time, kept me awake a few nights. Didn't really have a solution for it. I had these socks that I tried putting on to ease the pain, but there was so much pain getting the sock on over the heel that I sometimes wondered whether it was worth it. They stayed like that the whole time. And a dilemma of that was that I needed both hands and both feet to brace when I was moving around the cockpit, around the cabin, and that made it awkward to brace on my foot. A little bit of a nuisance. I had to get to food at either end of the canoe. How to get to that food was relatively easy. In the hot water up on Tasman 1, I just swam around to the ends of the boat. Tasman 2, too cold to swim, so I slid along the boat and slid up and over the cabin to get to the ends of the boat. What I didn't realise was that my little PLB here wasn't robust enough to stop actually pressing the PLB emergency button in sliding up and over the cabin. I managed to do that unknown, and the outcome was absolutely knew that was AMSA flying overhead, day 14. I had to somehow get the message across to them that I absolutely didn't need rescue. And so I looked straight ahead, didn't wave to them, didn't do anything that might indicate that I was in any way needing rescue. Fortunately, it turned out they'd talked to my land support. They had also relayed that I was fine. they were in the area, so they just sort of diverted to see what was the situation in response to the BLD, and so all was okay. A fairly tricky situation. That leads on to positivity, a positive frame of mind. It's a really important part, I think, of any sort of adventuring. And if you have done more extensive adventuring, how do you stay positive, not let the tricky bits overtake your frame of mind? It's really important. One of the things I found really helped was just learning poetry as I've had along. I loved trying to learn some banjo pads and poems. Didn't get very far, it took me hours and hours, so it was a great way to use time, paddling along, learning poetry. Put in this set of photos for what was probably the low light of my trip. Day 34, I was woken when the boat capsized when I was sleeping. I was thrown onto the top of the boat as it rolled upside down. All the loose little bits and pieces in the cabin just were flung everywhere. Woke up. Fortunately, the boat righted itself, so that was great. But there was all this stuff around. I donned my head a bit, so there was a bit of blood and guts and stuff too. Had to sort all of that out. That was how the night started. Also broke a bit of the rudder. So when I tried to start paddling in the morning, the rudder just didn't work. So I had to go out the back of the boat, find out what had got wrong, sort out a problem solved thing. That was part 2 of the problem, day 34. The third problem was that when I looked out to my sea anchor, the sea anchor wasn't there. There was the start of the bridle line, but there was no anchor beyond. When I pulled that in, the rope had just broken, the sea anchor was no more. So all 3 of those things happened to happen on one day. And it was quite tough to stay positive to get through those 3 things. By the next day, I got back into a positive frame of mind, realising that I had 4 spare rudders. I had 2 sea anchors to keep going with. The boat had righted itself after the capsize. Those things do take a bit of time to get in perspective though, and it was a tough day. I did have to lock myself inside twice in the cabin. This was my way of weathering bigger weather. If it was going to be too rough, I could just stay in the cabin, not paddle for the day, let the bad weather wash over. This was a view out through the hatch of waves just washing over the hatch while I'm having my 2 rest days. Relaxing. I did have a way of strapping myself into the bedroom so that I wasn't thrown around, so I could just strap in. And I also had a helmet that I wore on the rougher nights so I didn't clang my head while I was moving around and sitting in the cabin. I did find that the albatross were a great way of staying positive. To food, and you're probably wondering what sort of food works out on the ocean for 67 days. So desalinating I found to be a bit of a chore when I started doing that. I used to line up some of my treats, my food treats, to make it better. So you can see in that Arnott's biscuits featured. Also nuts, biltong. I went through quite a few snacks along my 3 hours. But I brought some snacks tonight, which I'm going to pass around and you can try. A friend made these Anzac biscuits and said, you must share them with the audience. So hopefully there's some that you can share with each other. Pass them around, enjoy. They were a sample of what I had out on the ocean. This is the staple though, the breakfast, lunch and dinner that I really enjoyed and still enjoy. It took 67 days to do the trip. I packed for 100 days There's 30 days left over that's still waiting up in Bell Bay. I'm looking forward to eating them. The key to breakfast was Weet-Bix. You saw that picture in the bedroom with all those boxes of Weet-Bix. I love Weet-Bix. They're plain, they're bland, they are just great. I still have lots of Weet-Bix. Not as many as I had then. I was having around about 8 or 9 Weet-Bix a day. I'd have 4 crunchy first up, then I'd have 4 or 5 that I had in another cup that I'd just nibble on for the first few hours of having. That was breakfast. That's what that was. Everything had to be in cups. That was the only way to eat out there. I also had some flatbread and Vegemite and peanut butter and marmalade that a good friend had provided. So that was the other part of breakfast, really enjoyable. Flatbread, did you know, lasts for 100 days. Of course, all this food had to have a shelf life of at least 100 days. Lunches, things like tins of spaghetti, tins of tuna, tins of sardines. A friend had said sardines are the best thing, so sardines definitely featured. Also, Vitaweeds. Vitaweeds are great, they're so easy. I used to spread 2 pairs with Vegemite and 2 pairs with peanut butter, and then have a little game with myself of whether I want to eat the Vegemite one first or the peanut butter. It would take many, many minutes of contemplation of being alone. Dinners were based around a dehydrated meal. These dehydrated meals actually came from Scotstown, so close by, and they were fabulous. Really easy, that was the key. All I had to do was open the bag, pour in the hot water, they were a great meal. I also had a couple of soups, and I found them fantastic as well. Again, really easy, really nice and warming, so it's usually cold when I was coming in. Have them, it's great to have them. And I also always had dessert of some sort, jam tarts or fruit cake or cheesecake or dried fruit, custard. I spent hours mixing up those ingredients to really enjoy dinner. And while I had dinner, I used to type out my little story that went out to the world of what had happened during the day. So it was a great way to spend the night. Dinner used to stretch from when I finished paddling around 7 o'clock until about midnight, and that was taken up with the desalinating, with the eating dinner, and taking out the story. That was what it looked like, trying to fit 100 days of food into 4 storage compartments. And you can see in that picture there's a few bottles of Coke. There was actually 100 bottles of Coke that I took for the trip, so I could have 1 bottle of Coke a night as my treat. Fantastic. So I'm a fan of Weet-Bix and Coke. And this was my cartoonist version of the Coke. I actually took cans of Coke on the first Tasman trip, and then I found that those cans rusted away so quickly, especially the ring pool. Either I couldn't open the ring pool, or the ring pool rusted away and the contents spilled before I got to it. So I switched to plastic bottles for the second. What was it like skywise? So just a few scenes from the sky. A few days were grey and glum, but there were a lot of days when there was exciting skies. And I spent many hours contemplating patterns in the sky or using the clouds as the way to navigate. I had a little compass on the deck so I could see go east or go southeast, and I'd just pick a cloud that was vaguely in that direction and try and head for it for most of the day. Sunrises, sunsets, it was all pretty special to have them laid on all the time. So many different varieties. Even right up to the last day, it was just beautiful out there. So we're getting towards the last day now. What was it like to head towards New Zealand? So I like sharing this photo. This was when I was convinced I was seeing land for the first time. There was a little tiny bit of New Zealand. I had a fairly basic map of that part of New Zealand because I hadn't planned to get anywhere near Stewart Island, so it wasn't a very detailed map of down there, but it did show enough of the features, and they coincided with like what I could vaguely see at this point in time, so I was convinced I was seeing New Zealand, and that was very exciting. Probably one of the most exciting moments when I realised that was land and there was a possibility that this was going to work. Very exciting. It took another 7 days to actually get there. Even the next day, so I saw on day 60, bit of Stewart Island. The next day I couldn't see land at all. It just hazed over a bit. It's just impossible to see land. The next day though, it popped up again more like this. Clearly I hadn't been hallucinating the day before. This was the real deal. And then by day 65, this was the first actual human contact I had in 65 days. How many of you have been alone for any length of time? More than, say, 2 days? Has anyone?
Yeah.
10 days? Good. It's amazing. It's pretty special, isn't it, to be alone, to know what it's like to be alone for that long. So, the final day, sharing that with you. And by some miracle, the weather on the final day was just sensational. Flat calm, sunshine, windless, beautiful. Riverton Marine Rescue came out and were guiding me in on their jet ski. That's the scene of Riverton, this little tiny town on the south end of South Island. They're ready, looking pristine and absolutely beautiful. You can see in that picture I had a little New Zealand flag on the front just to let the natives know that I was friendly. And that was the natives, plus a few of my friends there on the bank to greet me as I came into Riverton. And then taking the final strokes up into Riverton Harbour. I had an Australian flag as well, to know that had come from Australia. Plus a quarantine flag, you can see the yellow flag there, because that was an essential apparently for arriving in New Zealand. And then that was taking the first step onto land, and what I found out is that legs don't like being out on the ocean for 6 and 7 days. And my legs were quite wobbly when I took those first steps on shore. Fortunately, it's my older brother there to give me a helping hand out of the boat. Now, this was official So they needed to see my passport. They could have looked at all the things I had on board, all those potions, light milk powder, it could have been drugs, who knows what. They were really good. They just stood back, waited until I'd said hello to some people, and then stamped my passport. It was good. And by some miracle almost, the person in orange had arrived at the finish line with this trailer that we could put Blue Moon onto. Turned out he was the local marine rescue head. He'd been harbour master there. This was their trailer. He had a home, he took us in, looked after us for the next week. And he's the person that actually got the boat back to Sydney. So just the last few photos, sharing that experience. And the first sharing was the night I arrived, the first meal I had in Riverton, the first steak I've had in 67 days, and a group of friends there, family, friends from work. My boss had sent with my colleagues out to New Zealand to meet me. It was a pretty special moment to share those feelings with those people. I also got to talk to the local Riverton primary school, and these kids were just all over it with excitement, crawling in and out of the room. They all loved it. It was an exciting moment to do that with them. They had no idea. I asked them, how far is it from Australia to New Zealand? Someone put up their hand and said, 100 kilometres. So they had no idea really about the tale, but they did enjoy the play. This is Blue Moon's more recent tripping. and on big boats, put in a container in New Zealand. She's been up from New Zealand across to Australia, then out to Noumea, and now she's in Bell Bay. And hopefully, in the next few days, we'll get her on the trailer and down here to the museum as her final home. So I come to the message that I started with, the message I'd like to finish with, and that is that I have so enjoyed following my dream, fulfilling a dream, taking an adventure. I'd so recommend to all of you, whatever your dream is, dream it, do it, because you'll be so pleased with you. There are so many things we can do. It doesn't need to be a Tasman crossing, but just do it, whatever it is. And I know there are people out in there with great plans, so just make sure you follow them, follow the example of the people around you to do big things. There you go.
Thank you, Richard. And I can't imagine anyone's got any questions. But I guess go for your lives. Yes.
In your staying positive, did you find you needed to make absolute clear breaks between paddling, dinner, sleeping, with these really structured events of the day, or did they kind of blur together? What made you happy or positive as you went through more than 2 months?
I think there wasn't that much bang, this is one bit, that's the next bit. In a way there was, because I had to do a move from in the cabin, out of the hatch, into the cockpit. So I guess the physical, I had to do that. And I had to be careful that I could do that move when it was calm enough to be able to do the move. But the actual thought processes, it blurred, because I'd be thinking before I got out, I've got to have all these bits and pieces ready to go out with me. I had to put a GPS out there, I had to get lunch ready to go out there in the morning, I had to do the right clothes on, I had to sort out the sea anchor and the stuff that I'd stored in the cockpit. And then the other way, I had to go through the whole process of storing things back in the cockpit as I moved out of it, putting things away for the night, making sure things were sorted out. And I would be thinking about it for quite a while beforehand, what I'd like for dinner and what I'd like to do. So it sort of blurred. And I enjoyed all the parts, so it was nice to do either. Yeah.
I noticed you refer to going to sleep at night and paddling by day.
Mm.
And also, did you put yourself through any fitness training leading into the trip?
Something I got from Luke and also from Scott Donaldson was their version, I felt, of needing to be super fit for it. I have done a lot of canoeing, so there's sort of a baseline of fitness there, but I'm nothing like a Superman fitness-wise. And I never really thought that would be the limiting thing. It was much more likely to be a psychological thing or some other aspect other than just the physical being able to paddle along. I wasn't out there to break time records or anything like that, so the canoeing input was at a very high level.
Did you
More
find,
like just walking along.
did you find yourself getting tired, wearing out?
So fortunately, no. No, I could just paddle along. It usually started about 9 in the morning, finished at 7 in the afternoon, so something like 9 hours a day, and I could comfortably do the half day after day without wearing out. Yeah.
How concerned were you when you started going south? I saw you start trying to duck up there for a while.
So there was a little bit of concern. Fortunately, my weatherman was saying you've got 3 days of southerly coming, you'll be okay. I tried beforehand when there was more northwesters, northeasters happening, tried to get further north and hadn't been able to. And so I was really relying on his forecast, and these suburbs would come in and would blow me up, and they did. So it was okay.
So Richard, all of us, I'm sure, probably read you on Facebook most days.
Hopefully you did. Ian Renford that put them up there did an amazing job, because all I was doing was tip-tapping away maybe up to midnight, and he'd get it out there to the world in an amazing way.
So fabulous. So two things. One, I hope you're going to write some sort of book based on those Facebook postings.
The answer is no at the moment.
They were fabulous. I'm sure everyone
Thanks.
say that. But my question is, when you're out of the boat having your impromptu swim, my mouth was very dry when I read that. Being a kayaker, as many of us in the room are, that would have been a really big ocean moment. So can you talk us through that in any
This
way?
the capsize?
About it? Yeah.
So I had two capsizes. The one that I showed you when I was sleeping, where I got tipped upside down and I ended up on the roof of the boat and it self-righted. That was done. I had this other moment when I was out paddling along. It wasn't a particularly rough day, so I hadn't really been strapped in or thinking, brace myself in there at all, because it hadn't been that rough. A wave just must have come up out of the blue, got blue moon. All of a sudden we were upside down, and because I hadn't been braced in, I just got thrown out of the boat. My leg was still sort of half in the cockpit at the stage when blue moon righted herself, so that was a good starting point. Blue moon's up, I'm sort of still in the water, got my leg out, and blue moon's actually very easy to get into. Because she's so stable, I could just hoik myself up over the cockpit and slide back in. And so it was much more, oh my goodness, this is a big surprise that I'm out of the boat than anything else. And not really a particularly big deal at all.
Did the water get below?
So not into the cabin at all. That I always had the hatch shut and the ventilators didn't let in water, so there's no chance of any water in there. There had been some get into the cockpit, so I just had to pump that out.
Were you ever really frightened at any stage?
You can tell us.
You can tell
We won't tell anyone.
So in a normal, afraid sort of way, the sort of thing like when I capsized, no. There was nothing like when I do my whitewater stuff, that scare factor of getting caught on a big rapid. The things that did worry me were much more when I had the things break and I had to try and sort out things that might stop getting to the finish. That was more the sort of scare. So not an adrenaline type thing.
So what happens for you when you get frightened like that? Like everyone gets frightened. And so what happened to you? Like how do you bring yourself from being really fearful back to, being positive? Like what sort of process goes on?
Perhaps it's a little bit of my engineering mind and not being artistic and creating the big scene picture in my mind. It's more an engineering approach to the problems. There just has to be a solution to whatever the problem is. So I start thinking solution, how to solve the dilemma.
Cool.
I'm interested in how on earth you fitted all those Winnipeg's into the boat. $100 a coat.
So eight boxes of 750 grams of poison. The biggest box of Winnipeg's, 8 of them went down the side of my bed. So that's where they fitted. The coke was spread between the 4 compartments. Pretty much was a layer on the bottom of it.
But it must have been, those two things must have been at least half the volume of all the rest of the food.
So the Winnipeg certainly was a big volume, and that's why we got a big chunk of bedroom for it.
Yeah.
Coke wasn't too much a problem. But there was quite a lot of space in Blue Moon for a lot of food.
So were you sponsored by Winnipeg's?
I wasn't, but I have talked to the Sanitarium's New Zealand manager, and he has donated some money to the cause.
There's 900 Winnipeg's in
7, not boxes.
There was that many.
Did you carry an AIS or a radar reflector or anything to ward off unfriendly ships?
Yes, I contemplated a radar reflector, and everyone that had tried them had said they're useless. Big ships don't see them, don't look at their radar maybe enough to pick them up. So that was out. I did have an AIS put on board fairly late in the process. I ran through it, fairly insistent on that. So I did have it. It was useful when I was coming into Riverton. The marine rescue people could see me there. I don't think there was another boat that actually saw me on their radar, because there was no other boat that I saw. There was just no shipping out in that part of the Tasman. But it was there, because I had it and it could have done its thing.
So were you tethered on when you went over?
So yes, I did have a tether all the time. I had one tether that I used to do the move out of the hatch into the cockpit, and then I had a leg rope that I had permanently attached while I was paddling, and then the couple of times that I swam around the boat to do the deep barnacling, I had a tether that went onto the lifelines around the boat. There was just one time when I wanted to get a picture of the whole boat, and so I untethered and swam away from the boat far enough to be able to get the picture of the boat, and then swam back again. It was a beautiful
Bit like Steve. Of all the things you took, what was the one thing you didn't use?
Oh, there were many things.
What was the one thing you wouldn't have taken again?
Hard to answer that, because all of the many things that I'd taken that I didn't use were all about this minimisation. So I took a big first aid kit, never touched it, thank goodness. I took a lot of spares. I took 4 other rudders and I didn't need to use any of them. I took a spare paddle and never needed to use the spare paddle. So there are a lot of things that would have been vital if something had gone wrong in that area, but didn't need to use them.
Would you take any different clothing next time?
More cold weather stuff, for sure.
As in just thermal layers, or?
Maybe that. Maybe even a dry suit. I'm not sure if it needed to be that. Or at least a drier top, so dry.
Look, Rich mate, your water intake you said was 1.5 litres a day?
Yes.
When it comes to the norm for top end endurance athletes like yourself, that seems a bit low. Has that been pretty standard for yourself?
Yeah. Well, there was another 300 mils to go. so I don't take in that much. And I think also being cool and being wet most of the day reduces the need for it.
Yeah, incredible.
Could you just explain the engineering and the build of your boat and design? Did you have a naval architect involved in the design of that, or is that your field?
So structural engineering is my field, not naval.
Yeah.
But the structural did give me an idea of how strong to make it. And I started with a Mirage double seat kayak hull and just stretched it and widened it. So that was the hull sort of sorted out as a basic principle. The biggest guess I made was how much to widen it. How wide did I need to make it stable enough to self-right and be stable to stand up in it.
So the self-righting of the boat was a fluke.
not a fluke.
They quite often design a boat that self-rights as well. And that lump you've got there probably turned out to be a cab.
Yeah. So that bubble had a huge amount of air volume in it.
Yeah.
So it was never going to stay upside down.
Yeah.
It's totally unstable upside down. It would always flop onto its side. And from being on its side, just having all of that weight flow down, and it was enough to make it.
Did you have specific internal ballast, or just
No, just sort of. It would have been such a disappointment to lung around weight, but I did look into having trimaran type pods out there. The dilemma with them is
they're great for being upright, but they're also great for being upside down. So it would never have been self-righting with the trimaran sort of design.
And the hull, you ended up from the original drawings, something a lot lower on the water as well, which would have helped with wind engine and so
Yeah, so the windage of the cabin was so I could fit my head in sitting up. That was the height that I wanted to make it, and I could sit up either in the vestibule or in my bedroom. Just.
Was there a fact taken in towards the end of your trip when you're on the lighter, you've eaten a lot more of your food, and would that have been a factor into the weight of the boat, as in sort of writing as the weight was down the base?
So of the 900 kilograms, about 300 kilograms was boat, about 300 kilograms was spare gear, and about 300 kilograms was food. So I've probably eaten through maybe 200 kilograms of the 900 kilograms, something like that. Anyway. It didn't seem to make much difference. And even me moving from cockpit at the front of the boat to bedroom at the back didn't seem to make that much difference to the way it sat in the water.
Did you suss out how the rope of the sea anchor broke?
No, never really worked out.
Was it distant from the boat? It wasn't where it's attached on.
Correct. Yes.
Was your name on the parachute?
Sorry?
Was your name on the parachute?
No, unfortunately.
If found.
If found, return. It'd be interesting to know where it's floating. I'm not sure.
So do you think it was the wave that rolled you that also took the anchor out?
It's possible. Yeah. It would have been a big yank on the boat at that stage. Steve?
You mentioned that you started out with a Mirage 730.
With
a Mirage 730?
Yes. Yeah.
So, do I recall you...
Steve traveled a Mirage 730. He knows what they're like.
Do I recall you taking to a Mirage 730 with an angle grinder and cutting it into pieces?
Absolutely true. Yes. I bought a brand new Mirage 730 and cut it up.
Was Mirage claiming to have the first boat across the...
Well, Mirage, Andrew McCauley had his Mirage. I've used the Mirage now. So
it's still in there somewhere original.
Well, no, the original cut-up pieces were used to make the plugs, that made the mould, that made the hull. Yes. So it was a bit of a process to get from Mirage to the actual boat, but the shape is pure Mirage. The deck, as that picture showed, it was a timber frame that I put foam, 10mm foam all over, fiberglass the outside of that, peeled all of that off the timber frame, fiberglass the inside of the frame. That's the method of making the deck. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I had written him a letter. Could you just give us Clancy's
I wish I could. I have a mind like a suit. It's a beautiful one, isn't it? It's so clever. So cool.
Right, well, I think that's just about it. So again, thank you all for coming along.
One of those Anzac biscuits.